I've decided to make a 3-part video series focusing on PKU and anxiety. Okay, so let's do it. So before we progress, let's declare this out from the start, right? I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert in certain neurological conditions, but what I am is I'm an adult who's lived a particular life, who's lived this life with this condition, and this is just my story, my journey, and my thoughts, and that's all this channel was ever going to be. If through articulating my experiences and my thoughts I help other people, awesome, I'm happy with that. But what it's not going to be is a medical documented journal of exactly what you should do, publicized and backed up by research. I'll try and bring research into elements of kind of what I discuss here, but I'm not a doctor. But there is research and articles out there that state anxiety is somewhat higher in the PKU population. And the question becomes, why is that the case, and what can we do to kind of overcome that or reduce that so it becomes more bearable? Because the condition itself is, for some, incredibly overwhelming, and for all, difficult. What you don't want is to add a ton of anxiety in that then changes how we interact with the condition and the environment and our lives and the people around us, right? So while I was at ESPKU last year, there was a talk that focused on PKU and mental health. Part of that talk focused on anxiety, and part of these videos is only going to focus on a small part of that. And the reason for that is because it's such a big topic. It's ginormous, isn't it? The general population have anxiety. Anxiety is a normal human emotion, right? But there's a large element of PKU and living with this condition that has been just unexplored and under-researched, but that is starting to move forward. There is research coming through, and it is starting to say, and the medical professionals that work with adult population, children, etc., they are saying that people are struggling with the condition and anxiety is a part of it. The presentation that was put to the audience highlighted the fact, and I knew this actually before, but it was really interesting to hear it in a presentation and from a paper, that anxiety can be linked to dopamine and serotonin. How we then respond to the world is directly correlated with the dopamine and serotonin that is flowing through our bodies. So I've come to the conclusion that actually we are just walking chemical factories. We produce dopamine and serotonin, and they in turn make us feel good, make us feel happy. But also though, if those are at a low level, then obviously how we respond to the world and to the people in our lives and to the stress that we're under changes as well, for the negative. So in the future video, I'm going to explore ways that I kind of look at trying to increase those. But what I found interesting was that actually the first stage of all of this is the low protein diet. And I know for some people who maybe kind of struggle with the diet a little bit, that might suck knowing that, right? But knowing it for me has kind of gave me a new sense of understanding as well, especially on those days maybe when Phe levels are high and I'm a bit more impatient and maybe a little bit more grumpier. Now I can kind of reflect back and kind of understand why. And this is why the diet is so confusing and complex, right? Because not only are we different as humans, different tolerances, etc., but actually what this research showed, the one variable that seems to be the same. The higher your Phe levels go, the harder it is to maintain that true self. If you're a happy-go-lucky type of person, that person gets diminished. In fact, actually, it doesn't matter what type of person you are. The higher our Phe levels go, the grumpier we are, right? The less patient we are, the more maybe stressed out we are. Generally, we just feel bad and it just sucks, doesn't it? When I was in the presentation, how it was worded kind of hit home for me. Dopamine and serotonin is produced in our bodies. Serotonin, a large part of it is in our gut. And so they are chemicals that can cross the blood-brain barrier. And that then has that influence onto our behavior and how we feel. But high Phe levels, Phe acts as a blocker to those two chemicals getting into the brain. So they, even if they're there in our body, they don't cross the bridge as effortless as they would do normally. So I'm assuming then that what that means is that the levels of those dopamine and serotonin chemicals are lower in our brains, and that's then why we feel the way we do if our levels are higher. And I think that's quite important to know, right? Because if your Phe levels have been high for a long period of time, I think it's quite empowering, I guess, to know that actually it could have been years, right? That if it's years, you might start thinking that you're just a grumpy person. And other people actually that definitely don't understand you, don't understand the condition that you've got, maybe because you haven't told them, or maybe because you don't understand it yourself, or maybe you just don't want to share that, right? And it's perfectly in your right to not share that. It might be that they've just come to the conclusion that this is how you are. And you might have come to that conclusion too. These chemicals are having an influence on how you're reacting to certain circumstances. And I think that's empowering because it shows that it's not you. In the normal population, they have these problems too, right? But they may not have a blocker like Phe being the gatekeeper, I guess, or the gate closer to these chemicals getting into our brain. So I think it then becomes important to then figure out how then we kind of combat that. And that's why I'm going to make that third video, which concentrates on the tips and hints that I've got just through the research that I've done and how I've lived my life and how I've kind of changed, because my levels used to be a lot higher than they are now. How we all feel is different too, depending on the Phe levels. The more people that I speak to with this condition, the more that actually I learn that people are all different, right? And for some people, if they're at this level Phe, they're perfectly fine. But maybe if I'm at that level, I'm just not operating. If some people are here, you know, it's just the way it is. Everyone tolerates it different. Also though, I'm a big believer in that, and I know this from my experience, again, it doesn't mean it's across the board, but I do think that if our Phe levels are quite high and they've been high for a long period of time, it becomes our norm. We become accustomed to that feeling or those feelings. And so we adapt. And I think the human body is very good at adapting to its current situation. And so that's quite dangerous, I think, because as soon as it becomes your norm, you accept it. And that acceptance is what can keep you there. It's not knowing that actually things can improve or get better. So it becomes the norm, and it's not normal. It was only when I worked hard on the diet and was able to reduce Phe down to probably, you know, half that I realized how different I felt. And now, because I've been at this level for quite some time, I'm able now to see the difference. Those were feelings, you know, different types of feelings, not just anxiety. But it's good to know that actually it might not just be you. It might be this high Phe level that acts as a blocker to the brain. Now, there are different types of anxiety. And like I said, I'm going to go through some different ones that I've experienced in the second video. But I just wanted to kind of mention this to paint the picture and set the scene for those later videos, because if I just go straight into the tips and hints and the activities that I do that I feel increase those levels naturally, then I don't think it would do it justice. It's knowing that these levels are changeable, we can change them, we can influence them. But if the diet is out of control, even if we attempt to influence them with these future activities that I'm going to mention, the limitations are going to be quite severe. We're not going to have the same level of impact. So it becomes then that diet is key. So if serotonin and dopamine kind of are those chemicals that can give us those happy feelings, obviously the higher they are, the more that when we interact with our friends, our family, our children, our loved ones, our work, the trips and adventures that we may plan and go on, but also the daily life stresses that we kind of are just natural to everyday life, how we interact with them plays a part as well. And that's quite important too. But what is lovely is that this is now becoming more of a factor and more of a consideration in our community. It is being discussed. PKU was a ginormous event in Porto. There was a lot of people there, and this had a major spotlight. So it is being thought about. I think also I've mentioned previously that, you know, if serotonin is linked to our gut health as well and predominantly produced there, then, you know, maybe the level of nutrition that we're getting then plays an incredibly important part in that cycle, right? But if we have a really low tolerance level, then the type of food that we're having to digest is very highly processed. Then I don't know, does that then mean that our gut health is not as strong as what it could be? And so if that's the case, and I'm touching on subjects that these could all be different videos, if that's the case, does that mean that when a government or a healthcare provider look at the protocols and the conditions for if a person is successful or what's the word I'm looking for, or is responsive to a particular drug, like let's say Kuvan or serotonin, or not serotonin, I'm getting my words confused now, sapropratin, that these things need to be considered more. It's not just about reducing Phe. It's not just about doubling protein intake. It's also about gut health as well, right? We are a complex machine, really. We all are. You know, even without this condition, our brain is linked to our immune system and our gut health is linked to our brain, and it is a complete working machine. And so if one is impacted, the whole cycle is impacted. So does that need to be a consideration for healthcare providers moving forward? That if we just focus on one element, we're actually not focusing on all the building factors that lead up to that too. I don't know. That's going to have to be a separate video. If you do have any comments on this, please feel free to comment in the video and let's have that discussion, because this is only my viewpoint. It doesn't mean it's the only view. Hopefully this then sets the scene for the second video and the third video. Click that second video, which will be highlighted in the screen somewhere, and let's move on.